The air tasted like burnt copper and ozone, the way it always did right before something died. Cole Bannerman lay flat under a coolant manifold 3 decks below the Royal Promenade, a socket wrench clenched between his teeth, when the alarm started screaming in a pitch he'd never heard before. Not a hull breach klaxon, not a fire warning. Something older, something that made the 2 Thorngard sentries posted at the junction above him go rigid like they'd been struck. He spat the wrench into his palm and rolled out from under the manifold, grease striping his forearm from wrist to elbow, and looked up at 11 feet of alien muscle standing frozen in the corridor light. What Cole said was that. Neither guard answered him. They never did. To the Thorngard, a human maintenance tech ranked somewhere below the ship's plumbing in terms of things worth acknowledging. The one on the left finally spoke, and his voice came out flat and formal, each word placed like a brick. The Talon has been called. The princess is claimed. Cole didn't know what that meant yet. He would in about 4 minutes, and by then it would already be too late to say no. 2 decks up, in a promenade paneled with warm amber stone quarried from a homeworld none of the humans aboard had ever seen, Princess Ilyara Vexthorn stood very still while 11 Thorngard formed a loose ring around her and did absolutely nothing useful. She was young by the standards of her people, barely past her second centennial, and she had the tall, spare build of the Vexthorn line, pale gold skin catching the light like polished bone, dark eyes too large and too old for a face that young. She wore the deep blue morning silk her mother had died in, because today was supposed to be a memorial, not an ambush. Across the promenade, filling the archway like a wall had grown legs, stood Dreeth Coram. He was Caldrex, and the Caldrex did not do anything by half measures when it came to being enormous. 7.5 feet of corded gray muscle wrapped in strap-iron armor, a face like a hatchet had been left out in the weather, 2 long, twin ridges of bone running back from his brow like the beginnings of horns that had given up partway through. He smelled like hot metal and old blood, and when he smiled, which he was doing now, his teeth were the wrong shape for a smile, too many of them, too pointed. The Talon of House Caldrex has been invoked, he said, and his voice had no warmth in it anywhere, no contractions, no softness, like a legal document reading itself aloud. By ancient right, the succession of the Havorn colony is forfeit to trial. You will provide a champion, or you will forfeit the colony and everyone on it. There is no trial, said the lead Thorngard, a broad-shouldered captain named Cerix, though he said it the way a man says something he already knows is a lie. The Talon requires 40 days' notice under treaty. The treaty, Dreeth said, was signed by beings who assumed honor was mutual. I gave notice this morning. Your herald simply did not survive to deliver it. He rolled one shoulder, armor plates clicking. 40 days have passed in the eyes of the law. You have 1 hour to provide a champion, or the colony burns, and this princess burns with it by the old right of conquest. Ilyara's hands were shaking, and she hated that they were shaking, hated it with the specific fury of someone who has spent her whole life being told composure is a duty. She looked at Cerix. Cerix, a mountain of a man in ceremonial black plate, decorated with 3 centuries of the Vexthorn line's trust, looked back at her with something that might have been shame, if Thorngard were built to feel shame. Captain, she said, fight him. I cannot, Highness. You are 11 feet of augmented soldier standing 4 feet from a man who just murdered a herald. Fight him. The Talon binds combatants, Cerix said, low, urgent, the words coming out of him like they hurt. Any recognized soldier of the honor guard who takes the challenge and loses forfeits not the colony but the fleet, all of it. Every ship, every soul currently under Vexthorn colors becomes Caldrex property by the old right. He is counting on us being soldiers, Highness. He has structured this so that our strength is the trap. Then who? A champion, Dreeth said, savoring it, need not be a soldier. Any being who serves this house of any station may stand in the ring. That is the old right also. I chose those words for you, Princess. I chose them carefully. He looked past her. past Cerex, past the whole ring of frozen elite guards, and found, because he had clearly been told exactly where to look, the human currently jogging up the promenade steps with a wrench still in his hand and coolant stains on his knees. "You," Dreeth said, delighted in the flat, awful way a predator is delighted. "The frail one, you will do." Cole stopped on the top step. He looked at the princes. He looked at 11 guards who could each bench press a ground car and were doing nothing. He looked at the 7.5-foot murder-shaped problem currently pointing at him like he was a menu item. "I'm sorry," Cole said. "Do what now?" Nobody explained it to him kindly. Nobody explained it to him at all. Actually, Sarek simply gripped his shoulder with a hand that could have popped his head off like a bottle cap and steered him toward the ring that was already forming in the center of the promenade. Alien nobles and staff and off-duty crew pressing back against the amber walls to clear space. Because apparently when a Caldrex champion invokes an ancient blood right, everybody just knows to get out of the way. "Somebody tell me what's happening," Cole said, to nobody in particular. And it was the princess who finally answered him, stepping close enough that he could smell the morning silk, some kind of bitter incense woven into the fibers. "His name is Dreeth Coram," she said. "He is a talon-bearer of House Caldrex, which means he has killed at least one designated champion in ritual combat before, and probably several more that were never recorded because the challenger died from wounds after the match ended, and House Caldrex doesn't bother counting those. If he wins here, my father's colony on Havorn, 900,000 people, becomes property of House Caldrex under the old right of conquest. Every ship currently flying Vexthern colors becomes his fleet's property too, along with everyone serving on them, including you." "Great," Cole said, "and if I say no?" "Then the challenge stands unanswered, and by the same old right, he simply takes everything anyway, except now without the pretense of a fight, and probably kills everyone standing in this promenade first, starting with me, because I am the symbolic prize." Cole absorbed that for a second. He was 34 years old. He fixed coolant manifolds and reset burned-out grav plating, and had been quietly demoted 11 months ago from senior technician to general maintenance after a disagreement with a superior officer about safety protocols on a reactor housing that the superior officer had, for what it was worth, been dead wrong about. He owned 4 shirts, 2 of which had holes in them, and a photo of his mother that he kept in a locker, because there was nowhere else on a warship to keep anything. He had never been in a fight that mattered in his entire adult life. "Do I get a weapon?" he asked. "You may use whatever is on your person," Sarek said from behind him, voice tight. "That is tradition also. Some champions have fought bare-handed to prove a point. I would not recommend it." Cole looked down at the socket wrench still in his fist. He looked at the coil of insulated wire looped over his shoulder from the manifold job, and the multi-tool clipped to his belt, and the half-charged plasma cutter still riding in its holster on his hip, because he'd been 3 minutes from finishing a weld job before the alarms went off. "Okay," he said mostly to himself. "Okay." Dreeth Coram was watching all of this with the patient, unbothered amusement of a man watching a small animal try to figure out how doors work. He rolled his neck, drew a blade from his back that was less a sword than a slab of metal somebody had bothered to sharpen on one edge, and stepped into the ring. "I have fought champions with augmented spines," he said to the promenade at large, to the nobles pressed against the walls, to the princess in her morning silk, to anyone who would listen. "I have fought champions bred for war on 3 separate worlds. Your house sends me a maintenance drone with grease on its hands." He looked directly at Cole for the first time up close, and Cole had to tip his head back to meet his eyes. "You are frail," Dreeth said. "You are soft. Your bones will not survive the first strike. This is not an insult, human. It is simply true, and I do not understand why your house insults itself by sending you to die in its place." "Yeah, well," Cole said, hefting the wrench, hating how much his hand was shaking and hoping it didn't show. "Nobody asked me either." The first exchange lasted less than 2 seconds and ended with Cole on his back, ears ringing, tasting blood. He hadn't even seen the blade move. One moment Dreeth was standing at ease, the next the flat of that slab sword had caught Cole across the ribs and thrown him 8 feet into the base of a support column, and it was only the fact that Dreeth had used the flat and not the edge that meant Cole was breathing at all. He lay there for a second, staring up at the ceiling lights, doing an inventory of what still worked. Ribs on fire, left arm numb from elbow to fingers, everything else technically present. "Get up," Dreeth said, without heat, the way you'd tell a machine to reboot. "This is customary. I will allow you 3 falls before the match is considered decided in my favor. By attrition, as is proper." Cole got up. It took longer than he wanted it to, and his hand found the wall on the way, and somewhere in the crowd pressed against the amber stone, he heard Ilyara say his name just once, quiet, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. He didn't look at her. He looked at Dreeth, and at the 11 feet of unbothered gray muscle between him and every human currently serving on this ship. And he did the only thing that occurred to him, which was to notice, through the ringing in his skull, that Dreeth Coram was breathing through his mouth. Not from exertion, from the room. Cole had spent 4 years crawling through the environmental systems of this exact promenade deck, and he knew, the way you know the back of your own hand, that the amber stone paneling wasn't decorative. It was thermal mass, chosen because the ship ran hot near the reactor core 2 decks down, and the stone bled that heat slowly into the promenade to keep the ambient temperature comfortable for a species that liked things warm. Vexthern liked things warm. Cole had sweated through 3 shirts a week in this section, since he'd been assigned here. Dreeth Coram was Caldrex, and Caldrex, if the 2 years Cole had spent half listening to xenobiology briefings over the mess hall speakers meant anything at all, came from a cold world. A very cold world. Cole had fixed the environmental regulator on a Caldrex diplomatic shuttle 8 months ago, and the crew had kept the internal temperature 4 degrees below freezing the entire visit, joking that anything warmer made them sluggish. The promenade was currently 81 degrees, and getting hotter, because 11 Thorngard bodies and 40-some nobles and 1 very large angry alien were all radiating heat into a space that size, and the environmental system on this deck cycled slow. Cole spat blood onto the amber stone and got his feet properly under him. "You're going to want to finish this quick," he said. Dreeth's expression didn't change exactly, but something in the set of his shoulders did, a fraction of a degree of attention that hadn't been there before. "Why," he said, "would that concern me?" "No reason," Cole said, and lunged, wrench first, straight at the joint behind Dreeth's knee where the strap-iron armor gapped to allow movement. Not because he thought it would do damage, but because forcing Dreeth to pivot and block cost him effort, cost him heat, cost him breath, and Cole intended to make him spend all 3. Dreeth blocked it easily, backhanded Cole across the same already cracked ribs, and put him down again. The second fall hurt worse than the first, which Cole hadn't thought was possible. He lay on the stone with his vision going soft gray at the edges and heard, distantly, Dreeth telling the room something about efficiency, about how frail things broke fast and it was almost a mercy, and Cole thought, with the strange clarity that sometimes shows up right when a person should probably be panicking instead. He's not even sweating. Cole was. Cole was sweating through his coveralls, had been since the first hit, a full-body slick sheen of it soaking down his spine and dripping off his jaw, because that is what a human body does under stress and exertion in an 81-degree room, and Cole understood, lying on his back with 2 cracked ribs and 1 working arm, that this was the only tool he actually had. Not strength, not speed, a sweat gland. He got up again. "Impressive," Dreeth said, and for the first time there was something almost like genuine interest under the contempt. "Most champions do not survive 2 falls. You understand this changes nothing. I have killed 4 Talon challengers in single combat, and I have never once required more than the customary 3 falls." Sure, Cole said, breathing hard, tasting copper, watching a bead of sweat run off Dreeth's brow ridge and evaporate before it traveled an inch. Because Caldrec's skin didn't cool the way human skin did. Caldrec's skin just sat there, radiating heat outward with nowhere for it to go, no evaporative relief, nothing. Let's talk about that in 10 minutes. Dreeth pressed the advantage the way a professional does, without wasted motion, without theater, closing the distance and swinging that slab blade in a low arc meant to take Cole's legs out from under him. Cole didn't dodge it. He couldn't have. Not with one arm dead and his ribs grinding with every breath. He threw the coil of insulated wire off his shoulder instead, let it unspool between them, and stepped through the swing at an angle that put the wire directly in the path of Dreeth's trailing foot. It wasn't a trick that would have worked on someone paying attention to the ground. Dreeth wasn't. Dreeth was watching Cole's hands, the way a warrior watches hands, because hands are where weapons live, and he never looked down until his boot caught the wire and his own momentum did the rest, 7.5 feet of a armored alien pitching forward into the amber stone column, hard enough to crack the paneling. It didn't put him down for good. Nothing was going to put Dreeth Coram down for good with a length of maintenance wire. But it cost him a second and a half getting back to his feet, and Cole used every bit of that second and a half to draw the plasma cutter off his hip and thumb the ignition. And when Dreeth turned around, there was a working torch pointed at the exposed joint seam under his left arm, the one place the strap iron didn't quite meet the underlayer. The cutter wasn't a weapon. It was a fabrication tool rated for cold-cutting bulkhead plating at 1100 degrees, and Cole had never in his life used it on a person, and some distant professional part of his brain was screaming that this was an insane misuse of calibrated equipment, even as he jammed it into the gap, and held the trigger for exactly as long as it took Dreeth to roar and wrench backward, smoke curling off scorched armor edges. It wasn't a killing blow. It wasn't even close to a killing blow, but it was heat, added directly to a body that already had nowhere to put the heat it was generating just standing in this room, and Cole saw it land different than the wrench hits had landed. Saw Dreeth's motions get a half-beat slower, saw a fine sheen finally appear along his brow ridge, useless Caldrec skin with no evaporative cooling, just heat sitting there with nowhere to go. "You are already broken," Dreeth said, and his voice had an edge in it now that hadn't been there before, something that might have been the first flicker of actual effort. "I can hear it in your breathing. 2 ribs at minimum, possibly a lung. You should be on the ground." "Yeah, probably," Cole agreed, and did not go to the ground, because the third fall was the one that ended things, and he had, by his own count, exactly one left in him before Dreeth's rules took the choice away entirely. The third exchange was the ugly one. Dreeth came in with everything, done playing, done pacing himself for an audience, and Cole took a full strike across the shoulder that he felt more than heard, a sound like a green branch snapping, and the arm that had been merely numb went from useless to actively wrong, hanging at an angle shoulders were not built to hang at. He went down onto one knee, plasma cutter skittering out of his grip across the stone, vision strobing white at the edges, and for one long, honest second, he considered staying down. Nobody would have blamed him. 3 falls was the customary limit. He'd already gone past what anyone expected out of a maintenance tech with a wrench. Then he looked up, past Dreeth, at Ilyara Vexthorn standing in her dead mother's mourning silk with her hands pressed flat against her own sternum like she was trying to keep something inside her chest from getting out, and at Cerix and 10 other Thornguards standing frozen in a ring around a fight they were legally forbidden to help with, bound by their own strength into uselessness. And Cole thought about 900,000 people on a colony he had never seen and would never see, going about their ordinary Tuesday with no idea that their entire future currently hinged on whether a demoted maintenance tech with a dislocated shoulder could stand back up one more time. He stood back up one more time. He didn't stand up straight. He couldn't. He stood up hunched around his ribs, dead arms swinging loose at an angle that made even Cerix flinch, black spots crowding the edges of his sight, and he did the only thing left that made any sense to him, which was to run. Not away, around. Cole had spent 4 years learning every inch of this promenade's environmental architecture, because it was his job to crawl through the parts of it nobody else wanted to touch. And he knew, the way you know your own kitchen in the dark, that the heating vents along the base of the amber columns weren't decorative either. They were part of the same thermal mass system, venting reactor bleed heat into the room at specific intervals to keep the temperature steady. And every one of them had a manual override. He'd installed himself 8 months ago, after a complaint from a visiting dignitary that the room ran cold. He'd installed 4 of them. He remembered exactly where. He led Dreeth on a stumbling, ugly chase around the perimeter of the ring, taking hits he could have avoided if his legs worked properly. Because every hit that connected was a hit that cost Dreeth energy too, cost him breath, cost him heat he had no way to shed. And every few seconds Cole's remaining working hand found another vent grate and slammed the override with his palm, kicking the output up to maximum, until the promenade wasn't 81 degrees anymore. It was well past 90. And climbing, and the air had gone thick and wet with human sweat and reactor bleed heat, and something underneath it that smelled almost sweet, which Cole would later learn was the smell of Caldrec's skin, starting to actually cook at the edges of the armor seams. Dreeth caught him at the 4th vent, slammed him into the wall hard enough that something in Cole's chest made a sound he never wanted to hear again, and stood over him breathing in short, ragged pulls through an open mouth. Sweat, actual sweat, useless, pooling, going nowhere, running down into his eyes. Enough, Dreeth said, and his voice had lost its flatness completely now, gone rough and thick. Enough, you have made your point. Lesser creatures do not perform this way. This is not customary. Wasn't customary for me either, Cole said, from the floor, blood in his mouth, one eye swelling shut, and found, somewhere under the wreckage of his own body, one more thing to say. You want to call the 3rd fall? Go ahead. But you're gonna have to bend down to do it, big guy, and I don't think your knees are gonna love that idea right now. Dreeth Coram, 4-time Talon champion of House Caldrex, killer of soldiers bred and augmented specifically to face him, looked down at a human mechanic bleeding on the floor of an alien promenade and did not raise his blade. He knelt instead. It wasn't graceful. His knee hit the amber stone hard, armor plates grinding, and for a second the whole promenade went silent enough that Cole could hear his own ragged breathing echo off the walls, and 11 Thornguard who had stood frozen and useless through the entire fight all took an involuntary half-step forward, because nobody, in the recorded history of the Talon Rite, had ever seen a Caldrex champion kneel to anyone. You have won the 3rd fall, Dreeth said, thick-voiced, sweat dripping off his jaw onto the stone between them. By ancient right, I concede the challenge. He set his slab blade down flat on the stone, hilt toward Cole, in a gesture that Cole didn't understand yet, but that every alien in the room clearly did, because a low murmur went through the crowd pressed against the walls, something between shock and reverence. The colony of Havorn remains Vexthern property. The fleet remains Vexthern property. He stopped, breathing hard, wiped his mouth with the back of one massive hand. Bested. Cole, lying on the floor with a dislocated shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, a swelling eye, and the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has just discovered his own limits by exceeding them, said the only thing that felt appropriate. Cool, is there a medic on the ship, or? There was a medic. Her name was Priya Akanjovance. She was human. She had been Cole's upstairs neighbor for 2 years, and she swore at him extensively while resetting his shoulder against a support column. And for about 4 minutes it seemed like the worst of it was over, that the story was going to end here, with a demoted mechanic getting his ribs strapped in a promenade full of stunned aliens, while a princess in morning silk hovered nearby, not quite knowing what to do with her hands. Then the ship's comm system cut in over every speaker on the deck at once, the emergency all-hands tone that Cole had heard exactly twice before in 4 years of service, and a voice he didn't recognize said the words that turned a personal duel back into something much larger. Unidentified contact, unidentified contact, mass detected exiting warp at the system's edge, configuration consistent with a Caldrex heavy cruiser. IFF returns designate vessel Skarn's reckoning. Estimated time to weapons range of Havorn colony, 19 minutes. Dreeth Coram, still on one knee, went very still. "That is not possible," he said, and for the first time all afternoon he sounded less like a warrior and more like a man doing arithmetic he did not like the answer to. "The Talon right is binding. My house cannot commit further force while a champion contest is in progress. It is written." "It is written," said Syrinx, stepping forward, and his voice had gone hard in a way Cole hadn't heard from any Thorngard yet, "by people who assumed your High Lord intended to honor it." The truth of it settled over the promenade like the temperature drop after the heating vents finally cut back to normal. Dreeth had been sent to fight an honest duel, believing in the honesty of it the way a soldier believes in his orders, while somewhere above him in the Caldrex chain of command, someone with a great deal more ambition and a great deal less honor had already dispatched a cruiser to bombard Havorn regardless of how the duel turned out. Using Dreeth's challenge as nothing more than a clock to run down, while 11 Thorngard stood paralyzed by their own binding oaths, and a princess's champion bled out on a promenade floor. Dreeth stood up. It cost him visibly, joints still loose from heat exhaustion, but he stood, and when he spoke again his voice had the flat formality back in it, except now it was aimed somewhere else entirely. "I was given this assignment by High Lord Vashtek Caldrex," he said, "under the express and personal guarantee that the Talon right, once invoked, would be honored in full, win or lose, by both houses. I have spent 40 years building my name on that guarantee. I have killed men who trusted the same right I trusted, and I told myself it was clean because it was tradition, because it was honest." He looked down at Cole, still strapped and bleeding on the floor, and something moved behind his eyes that hadn't been there when he'd called him frail. "If Vashtek has ordered Skarn's reckoning to strike regardless of this outcome, then I have been made a liar in front of the one opponent in 4 decades who actually earned the right to call me one." "Great speech," Cole said, through gritted teeth, as Priya finished strapping his ribs entirely too roughly for his taste. 19 minutes, though. Anybody want to focus on that part?" 19 minutes turned out to be the most useful number anyone said all day, because it was Ilyara who did the math out loud, kneeling next to Cole with her morning silk pooling on the floor, and not caring at all that it was getting blood-stained. 19 minutes to weapons range," she said. "Not 19 minutes to us. The colony defense grid at Havorn can hold against a single heavy cruiser for perhaps 6 minutes before its shields fail, and the station's own point defense batteries have a maximum effective range that does not reach the colony at all. We cannot shoot it down from here. We are 3 light minutes from Havorn. Nothing we do on this ship touches that cruiser directly." "Then what can we do?" Syrinx said, and it wasn't really a question. It was a captain admitting out loud, in front of his princess, that he had run out of options that involved being large and armored. Cole, propped against the support column with his arms strapped tight to his chest, found that his brain, despite the ribs, despite the shoulder, despite the specific floating unreality of having just survived single combat with an alien the size of a delivery truck, was doing the thing it always did when a system in front of him was broken. It was starting to sort the pieces. "This station relays comms through the Havorn colony's own array, right?" he said. "Standard practice, deep space courtesy hop, so ships don't have to run independent long-range rigs. I rewired half that relay junction 2 months ago because the housing was corroding." "That is correct," Ilyara said slowly, watching him the way you watch someone assembling something you can't quite see the shape of yet. "Comms only, not weapons. The relay array has no offensive capability." "Didn't say weapons," Cole said. "I said comms. What's the colony's actual defense grid built around? Not the shields, the grid, the thing generating the shields. It was Priya, of all people, who answered, because Priya had spent 3 years before this posting doing hazard response work on a colony world with an identical Vexthern standard defense grid, and she rattled it off without thinking, the way you recite something you learned under duress and never forgot. 12 ground-based emitter towers, phased array, all synced off a single master timing clock, so the shield harmonics don't destructively interfere with each other. You lose the master clock, the whole grid desyncs, and the shield collapses inside about 90 seconds while backup clocks spin up. And that master clock signal, Cole said, feeling the shape of it now, feeling it click together the way a stuck valve finally clicks free, gets its timing reference from where? Priya stared at him, then her expression did something complicated. "Oh no," she said. "Oh no what?" said Cerix. "It syncs off the deep space relay network," Priya said. "The same one this station's comm array feeds into. It's standard practice, cheaper than 12 independent atomic clocks, so colony defense grids just borrow timing off the civilian relay backbone. Which means I can talk to it," Cole said. "From here, right now. If I know what I'm doing, and I very much know what I'm doing, because I rewired that exact relay junction with my own 2 hands 8 weeks ago, and I remember exactly which housing panel has the override jumper in it." "You intend to interfere with the colony's own shield grid," Dreeth said slowly, "as a defensive measure." "No," Cole said. "I intend to make their shield grid do something it was never designed to do, on purpose, for about 4 seconds, which is going to look like a malfunction to anyone watching from a cruiser bridge, and which is going to matter a whole lot more than it sounds like it should. But I can't do the fine work with one arm strapped to my chest and my brain running on fumes. I need eyes on the relay junction schematic, and I need somebody who can carry me there faster than I can currently walk, because right now I'm moving at the speed of a man whose ribs are held together with me. Dickel tape and spite." Dreeth Coram, 4-time Talon champion, dishonored by his own High Lord, looked down at the human who had just handed him the shape of his own redemption without asking for anything in return, and did not hesitate. "I can carry you," he said. The relay junction was 4 decks down, in the guts of the station where the amber promenade stone gave way to bare gray bulkhead and exposed conduit, and Dreeth carried Cole there at a dead run, with a care that looked strange coming from someone who 40 minutes earlier had been trying to break his ribs on purpose, one massive arm cradling him against a chest plate still radiating leftover heat like a cooling engine block. 16 minutes, Ilyara called out behind them, running to keep pace in silk that was absolutely not designed for running, Cerix and 2 other Thorngard falling in around her, because whatever binding law kept them from fighting a Talon duel apparently said nothing about escorting a princess through her own station's maintenance corridors. The junction itself was a mess of cable trunking and access panels behind a door that required a technician's override code, and for one bad second Cole thought his access credentials, downgraded along with his rank 11 months ago, weren't going to clear the lock at all, until he remembered, with the specific relief of a man recalling a loophole, that maintenance override codes never actually got revoked when your clearance did. Because nobody in station administration had ever bothered updating that particular subsystem, a bureaucratic failure that was, for once in his life, working entirely in his favor. The door opened. Inside was a wall of humming equipment, a tangle of fiber conduit feeding into a squat gray housing about the size of a filing cabinet, and one loose panel with a jumper cable hanging out of it exactly where Cole remembered leaving it. 14 minutes, Priya said, checking a wrist display, having sprinted the whole way down 4 decks in medic boots that were not built for it either. "Put me down there," Cole said, pointing at the floor in front of the open panel, and Dreeth set him down with a gentleness that made Priya actually stop and stare at him for a second before getting back to work strapping a portable brace around Cole's dead arm, so he'd at least have something resembling stability to lean on. "Talk me through what you're doing," Ilyara said, kneeling beside him, "because I would like to understand how a mechanic saves a colony of 900,000 people from inside a supply closet." "It's not really a supply closet," Cole said, working the access panel loose one-handed, sweat still running down his neck from the fight, adrenaline the only thing currently keeping the pain at a manageable distance. "It's the relay junction that syncs Havorn's shield grid timing clock. Normally, I'd never touch this thing. Messing with a colony's defense timing from 3 light minutes away sounds like the kind of thing that gets you fired even when you're not already demoted. But right now, that cruiser's sensor suite is going to be reading Havorn's shield harmonics the same way our own sensors read anyone else's, as a signature, a pattern. Ship's plan bombardment runs around the pattern they expect to see, timing their opening volley to hit during the natural desync window between shield pulses, the same way you time a jump rope." "And you intend to change the pattern," Dreeth said. "I intend to break the pattern for exactly 4 seconds, right as that cruiser is calculating its firing solution," Cole said, fishing the jumper cable free and starting to strip the insulation off a secondary lead with his teeth because his one working hand was busy holding the panel open. "If their targeting computer is mid-calculation when the shield harmonic suddenly jumps instead of holding steady, its firing solution goes stale. It has to recalculate from scratch. That costs them time. Not forever, maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes if I'm lucky and their systems aren't as good as ours. But 90 seconds is enough for Havorn's actual defense fleet to get their intercept vectors locked in, assuming somebody up top gets them the warning fast enough." "That is somebody's job," Ilyara said, already turning to Cerix. "Get me a priority channel to Havorn Command, direct line now. Tell them to scramble everything they have. Tell them the timing window is coming and to use it." Cerix was already moving, barking orders into a comm unit clipped to his collar, and for the first time since the alarms had gone off, the promenade's paralyzed uselessness had turned into something that actually looked like a plan. 11 minutes, Priya said, and there was a tightness in her voice now that hadn't been there before, because 90 seconds of a jammed firing solution meant nothing if the wiring underneath Cole's blood-slicked fingers didn't cooperate. The problem, and Cole found this out the hard way about 90 seconds into the actual work, was that the jumper override hadn't been designed to be triggered remotely, on purpose, by someone deliberately trying to desync a signal. It had been designed to let a technician manually recalibrate the timing clock during scheduled maintenance, a slow, careful, two-handed procedure that assumed the person doing it wasn't operating on one working arm and a chest full of cracked ribs, while a countdown ran in the back of everyone's mind. "I need a second set of hands that isn't attached to somebody who could crush this housing by breathing on it wrong," Cole said, glancing sideways at Dreeth, whose knuckles alone were roughly the size of the component Cole needed touched. "I can hold a wire," Ilyara said, already reaching past him into the open panel before anyone could argue about the wisdom of a princess getting her hands dirty in a maintenance closet. "Tell me which one." "The blue lead, second from the left. Hold it exactly where it is and do not let it touch the housing frame, because if it grounds out we lose the whole override and I do not have time to rebuild this from scratch." She held it. Her hands, Cole noticed somewhere in the part of his brain not occupied with wire strippers, were steadier than his. 9 minutes, Priya said. Cole spliced the jumper into the secondary lead, feeding a deliberately corrupted timing pulse into the line that fed Havorn's master clock. Not a big pulse, not an obvious one, just a fraction of a second stutter, engineered to look, to any sensor suite watching from a cruiser 3 light minutes out, like ordinary equipment jitter, the kind every deep space relay produced occasionally, and no targeting computer would ever flag as deliberate. The trick wasn't strength. It never had been, not once today. The trick was making something small enough to be invisible land exactly when it mattered most. "That's it," Cole said, sitting back against the housing, sweat running into the cut over his eye, breath coming in short pulls that had nothing to do with exertion, and everything to do with two ribs that had opinions about being upright. "It's live. It'll fire the stutter automatically the next time it detects an active targeting lock pattern in the harmonic band a heavy cruiser uses. I can't control exactly when in that 90-second window it lands. I just made sure it will land." 7 minutes to weapons range, Priya read off, and nobody said anything for a long, ugly stretch of seconds, because there was nothing left to do now but wait and find out whether 4 seconds of stolen sensor jitter, engineered by an off-duty maintenance tech with a dislocated shoulder, was actually going to be enough to save 900,000 people on a colony none of them could currently see. Waiting turned out to be its own kind of pain, worse in some ways than the fight had been, because during the fight there had at least been something to do with his hands. Now Cole just sat propped against a humming relay housing, sweat cooling on his skin, ribs grinding every time he breathed too deep, and watched a princess in blood-stained morning silk stare at a wrist display like she could will the numbers to move faster. "Talk to me," Ilyara said, not looking away from the display. "About anything. I would rather think about something other than the 7 minutes." 6 minutes, Priya corrected, with the specific gentleness of someone who has learned exactly how bad an idea it is to be imprecise around a person in crisis. Cole considered this. His brain, still running hot on adrenaline and the fading edges of shock, reached for the most useless piece of information available to it, which turned out to be the truth. "I got demoted 11 months ago," he said, "because I refused to sign off on a reactor housing seal that a superior officer wanted certified early so he could hit a maintenance quota. I told him the seal wasn't within tolerance. He told me it was close enough. I told him close enough on a reactor seal is how you get a hull breach at the worst possible moment. And he told me I was replaceable, and he was right, technically, because they demoted me the next week and put someone more agreeable in my old post." "What happened to the seal?" Ilyara asked. "Failed inspection 2 months later, under a different tech's watch, right before it would have been signed off. Cost the ship 4 days in dry dock instead of 1 dead reactor housing crew." Cole managed something that was almost a laugh, which hurt his ribs enough that he immediately regretted it. "Nobody apologized. I just got to keep being right and unemployed at the same rank for 11 months. Figured that was going to be the whole rest of my career, honestly. Fixing manifolds, keeping my head down, being the guy nobody remembers is on the ship until something breaks." "You are not that anymore," Dreeth said, from where he stood at the edge of the relay junction, arms crossed, watching the corridor like he still expected an ambush even now. "I have fought 40 champions in the Talon right. I remember every name. I will remember yours before all of them." "Great," Cole said. "Put it on my next performance review." 5 minutes, Priya said, and her voice had gone thin. Ilyara looked over at Cole, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there in the promenade, something that had burned away the careful composure she'd been raised into and left something rower underneath. "Why did you answer?" she said. "When Dreeth pointed at you, everyone else in that promenade had a reason to freeze. The Thornguard were bound by oath. The nobles were bound by fear. You had no binding at all. You could have simply said no, and by every custom of the right, no one would have blamed a servant for declining a duel meant for soldiers." Cole thought about it, actually thought about it, because it deserved a real answer and not a joke, even though a joke was sitting right there and would have been so much easier to reach for. "I've spent 4 years on this station fixing things nobody else wants to touch," he said. "Coolant lines nobody wants to crawl into. Wiring nobody wants to trace. It's not glamorous work. Most days nobody even knows I did it, they just know the lights came back on or the air stopped smelling like burnt plastic. But it matters. Every time, whether anyone's watching or not." He looked at her, at the morning silk, at the incense woven into it for a mother she'd buried, and hadn't finished grieving before someone tried to burn her colony down on the same day. You were about to be the thing that got sacrificed because a bunch of very large, very capable people were legally required to stand there and watch it happen. I wasn't, so I didn't. 2 minutes, Priya said, and nobody spoke after that, because there wasn't anything left worth saying that would matter more than the silence did. The comm unit on Sarix's collar crackled to life at what felt like the worst possible moment, and also, somehow, exactly on time, a voice thick with static and distance, and the specific breathless quality of someone relaying combat information in real time. Havorn command to Vexthern relay. Havorn command to Vexthern relay. We are reading a hard desync on Skarn's Reckoning's targeting telemetry. Repeat. Hostile firing solution has gone stale. Our intercept squadron has closed to engagement range and is currently. A burst of static swallowed 3 full seconds of the transmission, and Cole realized he was holding his breath without having decided to. Cruiser has broken off. Repeat. Hostile cruiser has altered course and broken off approach. Engagement squadron reports no ordnance was fired on the colony. Colony status, intact. Repeat, colony status, intact. Nobody moved for a second. Then Priya made a sound that was half a laugh and half something closer to crying, and sat down hard on the floor of the relay junction like her legs had simply stopped being interested in holding her up. And Ilyara closed her eyes and pressed both hands flat against her own sternum again, the same gesture from the promenade, except this time it looked like relief instead of dread. "It worked," she said, quiet, like she hadn't quite believed it would until the words were said out loud by someone else. "It actually worked." "Told you," Cole said from the floor, and then immediately ruined the dignity of the moment by wincing hard enough that Priya had to grab his good arm to keep him from doubling over. "Okay, told you, but also, genuinely, can somebody get me an actual doctor now? Because I think the tape situation on these ribs is not holding as well as advertised." Dreeth Coram, still standing at the edge of the junction with his arms crossed, looked down at all of them, the princess sitting on a supply closet floor with dried blood on her morning silk, the medic laughing and crying at the same time, the mechanic who had beaten him in single combat now cracking jokes about his own broken ribs less than 3 minutes after saving a colony he would never see, and did something that, judging by the way Sarix's eyebrows climbed, was even more unusual for a Caldrex Talon champion than kneeling had been. He laughed, a short, rough, genuinely surprised bark of a laugh, like it had escaped before he decided to allow it. "I came here to collect a colony," he said. "I am leaving having witnessed a species use a supply closet, 4 seconds of engineered sensor noise, and a princess holding a wire correctly to defeat a warship. I do not think there is a section of Caldrex military doctrine that has any language prepared for this outcome." The next several hours were a blur, the way the aftermath of anything enormous tends to be, full of details that mattered enormously to everyone except the person who'd actually done the work, who mostly just wanted to lie down. Cole spent most of it on a medical table in the station's small infirmary, drifting in and out of a pain medication haze while Priya reset his shoulder properly this time, wired his ribs with something a great deal more advanced than tape, and informed him with the specific bluntness of a friend rather than a doctor that he was an idiot, a hero, and possibly both, and that she'd never once in 2 years of living down the hall from him pegged him as someone who'd end up fighting an alien war champion in a promenade with a plasma cutter. "I fix things," Cole said, muzzy with painkillers. "That's all it was. Somebody handed me a problem. I fixed the problem. Sometimes the problem is a coolant valve. Today it was a 7.5-foot murder guy. Same basic process." "You're going to want to write that down before the drugs wear off," Priya said, "because it's the single dumbest and most accurate thing anyone's ever said to me in this infirmary." Outside the infirmary, in rooms Cole wasn't awake for, the political consequences of the day unfolded with the particular speed that only exists when a great many powerful people are suddenly extremely eager not to be blamed for something. High Lord Vashtek Caldrex, whose orders had sent Skarn's reckoning toward Havorn regardless of the Talon Right's outcome, found himself facing a furious formal inquiry from his own house's ruling council once Dreeth Coram, undefeated champion, four-time Talon-bearer, a man whose word carried weight precisely because he had never once been caught lying about a duel's outcome, stood in front of that council and testified, in the same flat, formal, contraction-free cadence he used for everything, that his own High Lord had made him an instrument of dishonor without his knowledge or consent. It did not go well for Vashtek. House Caldrex, whatever its faults, took the sanctity of the Talon right seriously enough that using it as bait while a fleet moved in behind it was, by their own ancient law, a crime graver than losing the duel outright would have been. Cole never did learn all the details of what happened to Vashtek afterward, something involving stripped titles and an exile posting to a mining colony at the edge of Caldrex space, delivered second-hand through Cerix in a tone that suggested the details were more satisfying than the summary let on. But he learned enough to know that House Caldrex had quietly, formally, and very publicly renounced any claim on Havorn, on the fleet, and on anything else connected to that day's broken right, along with an unusually specific formal apology addressed, by name, to the human champion of House Vex Thurn. He found out about that particular detail 3 days later, sitting up in a proper hospital bed instead of the infirmary cot, when Ilyara came to visit him without any guards at all, which he understood by then was itself a kind of statement. "You've been declared a champion of House Vex Thurn," she said, without preamble, setting a data slate on the table beside his bed. "Formally, retroactively, as of the moment you answered the challenge. It carries rank, quarters befitting the rank, and a stipend that is, I am told, extremely generous by human maintenance technician standards." "What's it carry in terms of coolant manifold duty?" Cole said. "Because if the answer is none, I feel like somebody's going to have to explain to whoever replaces me why the reactor housing seals on Deck 4 keep failing, and I promise you it will not be a fun conversation." Ilyara looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved 900,000 people you will never meet, using a plasma cutter, a coil of wire, and a working knowledge of thermal regulation systems that you developed doing a job most of my court considers beneath notice. I offered you a title, and your first question is about coolant manifold duty." "Somebody's gotta keep the lights on," Cole said. "Champion title doesn't fix a busted valve." "No," she agreed, and something in her voice had gone warm in a way it hadn't been since before the alarms went off that morning. "It doesn't. I suppose you'll simply have to do both." Dreeth Coram did not leave with his cruiser's wreckage of a chain of command. He requested, formally, through channels, with the same flat contraction-free syntax he used for everything, as though asking permission to change allegiance were no different than asking permission to refuel, to be released from House Caldrex service, and accepted into House Vex Thurn's honor guard, citing, in the official petition Cole eventually got to read a copy of, a debt of correction owed to the human champion who demonstrated, through direct combat, the specific and total inadequacy of my previous understanding of strength. Cerix, to his credit, did not make this easy. A four-time Talon champion asking to join the very honor guard whose princess he'd nearly gotten killed was not a request anyone processed casually, and there were weeks of formal vetting, oaths, and at least one shouting match Cole heard about second-hand that apparently ended with Cerix and Dreeth arm wrestling in a supply corridor at 2 in the morning, which Cerix won, barely, and which seemed to satisfy some requirement of alien guard captain etiquette that Cole never fully understood and didn't ask too many follow-up questions about. By the time Cole was cleared for light duty, 3 weeks later, ribs healed, shoulder still occasionally clicking in a way Priya assured him was cosmetic and not structural. Dreeth Coram was wearing Vexthern colors over his strap-iron armor, and had somehow become, of all things, the person who walked Cole through the promenade every morning on the way to the maintenance bay, ostensibly as an honor guard duty, and actually as far as Cole could tell. Because Dreeth had developed an intense and specific interest in human engineering after watching 4 seconds of relay noise defeat a warship, and peppered him with questions the entire walk. "Explain to me again," Dreeth said, on one such morning, matching Cole's still slightly careful pace down the amberstone corridor, "how a timing stutter defeats a targeting computer when the computer itself is not damaged in any way." "Because the computer's not stupid, it's just literal," Cole said, for what felt like the 5th time that week. "It builds a firing solution based on a pattern it expects to hold steady. Break the pattern for even a heartbeat, right when it's finalizing the math, and the whole calculation goes stale, not wrong exactly, just outdated, like doing your taxes off numbers that changed the second before you filed. It has to start over. That's not a flaw in the machine. It's just what happens when something built to be precise gets fed one deliberately imprecise moment at exactly the wrong time." "This seems," Dreeth said slowly, "like a vulnerability that could be engineered against, deliberately, by anyone who understood it." "Yep," Cole said. "Guess what I did for a living the whole time everybody on this ship thought I was just a mechanic." Dreeth considered this with the particular gravity he seemed to bring to every human concept he was still cataloging. "I have killed 40 champions," he said. "I understood strength as the only currency worth measuring. You have shown me an entire second currency I did not know existed, and I find I resent how thoroughly it has undone 4 decades of my own certainty." "You get used to it," Cole said. "Took me 34 years and a dislocated shoulder to figure out the same thing, so don't feel too bad about the timeline." The formal ceremony happened a month later, in the same promenade, the amber stone paneling repaired where Dreeth had cracked it against the column. And it was, by every account Cole heard afterward, the single most uncomfortable hour of his entire life, which was saying something for a man who'd recently been thrown across a room by an alien war champion. House Vexthern did ceremony the way it did everything else, thoroughly, formally, at enormous length, and Cole stood in a dress uniform that Priya had to help him into because his shoulder still didn't love certain angles, while an official read out a full accounting of the day's events to an assembled crowd of nobles, off-duty crew, and a scattering of visiting dignitaries from 3 other houses who had apparently shown up specifically because word of the human champion had traveled faster than anyone expected. "On this date," the official read in a voice pitched to Carrie, "Cole Bannerman, maintenance technician, 3rd class, did answer the Talon rite of House Caldrex when no soldier of the honor guard was permitted to do so, did sustain grievous injury across 3 falls in defense of Her Highness Ilyara Vex Thurn, did secure victory through endurance and technical ingenuity where strength alone would have failed, and did subsequently avert a fleet-level attack upon the Havorn colony through direct engineering intervention, at further personal risk, within minutes of concluding single combat. For these acts, House Vexthern confers upon him the rank and honors of champion in perpetuity, with all rights and privileges thereto." There was applause, a lot of it. Cole stood there, ribs still faintly aware of themselves under the dress uniform, and did the thing that felt most honest in the moment, which was to look faintly miserable about all the attention while everyone around him beamed like it was the best day of their lives. "You look," Ilyara said afterward, at the reception, handing him a drink he was pretty sure he wasn't supposed to have with his current medication, "like a man being congratulated for something he'd rather forget happened." "I look like a man who wants to go fix the ventilation ratio on Deck 6, which has been running 4% low since the fight cracked 2 suppo. RT SEALs nobody's gotten around to," Cole said. "I've had 3 different nobles ask me to bless their children today. I fix pipes. I don't know what a blessing even involves." You could learn. I could also just fix the pipes, Cole said, which is a thing I actually know how to do, and which nobody's currently in danger from me getting badly wrong. Ilyara laughed, an actual laugh, unguarded, the kind Cole hadn't heard from her once in 4 years of passing her in corridors as an anonymous maintenance tech she'd never once had reason to notice. The champion of House Vexthorn, she said, wants to go fix a ventilation ratio instead of accepting his own hero's reception. The champion of House Vexthorn, Cole said, would like it on the record that he was perfectly happy being ignored, and that being famous mostly just means more people interrupt him while he's trying to work. Duly noted, she said, and there was something in the way she said it, something warmer than protocol required, that made Sarex, standing a respectful distance away with Dreeth beside him, exchange a look neither of them commented on out loud. Word got around the crew decks fast, the way it always does, and by the following week Cole had noticed a specific, subtle shift in how people treated him that had nothing to do with the new rank insignia Priya kept threatening to sew onto his coveralls out of spite. Junior techs who'd never spoken to him before started asking his opinion on repair jobs. A Thornguard who'd stood frozen in that ring, unable to help, found him in a corridor 2 weeks later and said, simply without elaboration, "Thank you," and walked away before Cole could figure out how to respond to that. Even the ship's senior engineering officer, the same one whose bad reactor seal call had gotten Cole demoted 11 months earlier, stopped him in a hallway, looked at him for a long, uncomfortable moment and said, "I was wrong about the seal tolerance. I should have listened to you the first time," which was, Cole gathered from the stunned silence of everyone else in the corridor, the closest thing to a formal apology that officer had ever issued to anyone in his career. Cole took all of it the same way he took the ceremony, the title, and the stipend, with a shrug, a joke, and a quiet insistence on getting back to actual work, because somewhere on Deck 6 a ventilation ratio was still 4% low, and champion or not, somebody had to go fix it. 6 months later, Cole was back under a coolant manifold on the same maintenance deck where the whole thing had started, wrench in hand, when the alarm sounded. Not the old, awful one that had frozen the Thornguard solid, just a routine pressure warning on a valve 2 sections over, the kind of alarm that meant somebody's afternoon was about to get slightly annoying and nobody's life was in danger. He rolled out from under the manifold anyway, out of habit, and found Dreeth standing in the corridor above him, no longer wearing strap-iron Caldrex armor but the deep formal plating of a Vexthorn honor guard, arms crossed, watching him with an expression Cole had learned, over 6 months, to recognize as the alien equivalent of mild amusement. "You are aware," Dreeth said, "that as champion of House Vexthorn, you are no longer required to personally investigate every pressure alarm on this deck. There are other technicians for this." "There are," Cole agreed, standing and wiping his hands on a rag that lived permanently in his back pocket, now regardless of what uniform he was technically supposed to be wearing. "But I like knowing exactly what's wrong with my own ship before somebody tells me it's fine when it isn't. Old habit." "It is a strange habit for a champion." "It's the only reason I'm a champion at all," Cole said. "Figured that's worth holding on to." Ilyara found them both there 10 minutes later, having apparently developed her own habit of showing up on maintenance decks more often than any official duty required, and the three of them ended up sitting on an overturned equipment crate in a corridor that smelled like coolant and hot metal, talking about nothing in particular, which was, Cole had come to realize, exactly the kind of afternoon he'd wanted his whole life and never expected to actually get. "I have been thinking," Dreeth said, after a while, in the flat, formal cadence that Cole suspected was never going away no matter how long he stayed among humans, "about the day I called you frail." "You called me a lot of things that day," Cole said. "Frail was one of the nicer ones." "I meant it as fact, not insult at the time. I have since revised my understanding. You are frail in the sense that your bones break more easily than mine, Your skin tears where mine would only bruise, and a single well-placed strike very nearly ended you in front of a full promenade. Dreeth paused, and something in his posture shifted, a small adjustment that Cole had learned over months of walking beside him, meant he was choosing his next words with unusual care. But frailty and weakness are not the same measurement, and I confused them for 40 years across 4 decades of killing men stronger than you and calling it strength. You broke repeatedly and did not stop. That is not a lesser trait than my own. I no longer believe it is a lesser trait at all. Cole considered this, sitting on an overturned crate with grease on his hands and a princess on his left and a reformed war champion on his right, and found, to his own mild surprise, that he didn't have a joke ready for once. "Yeah," he said finally, "that's about the size of it." "There is a ceremony next week," Ilyara said, after a companionable silence, honoring the 1-year anniversary of the Havorn colony's founding. "My father would like the champion of House Vexthurn in attendance, in full formal dress, seated at the head table." Cole groaned, loud and genuine, the exact sound of a man who has spent 6 months discovering that being a hero comes with an unreasonable amount of paperwork and formal wear. "Can I fix something instead? There's gotta be a broken valve somewhere on that colony that needs a technician more than it needs another guy in a stiff collar nodding at speeches." "You could do both," Ilyara said, smiling in the way she only did around him, "if you were efficient about it." "I'm always efficient," Cole said. "It's the one thing about me that never got demoted." There's a version of this story, the version most of the promenade crowd probably still tells at dinner parties across 3-star systems, where the important part is the duel, the towering Caldrex champion, the 3 falls, the human mechanic who wouldn't stay down. That version isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete, the way stories about the loudest 10 minutes of somebody's life always leave out the quieter parts that actually mattered more. The truth is that the duel bought time. It didn't save anybody. What saved 900,000 people on a colony 3 light minutes away was a maintenance override jumper. A corroded relay housing Cole happened to have rewired 8 weeks earlier out of nothing more than professional pride, and the specific, unglamorous kind of competence that comes from spending 4 years crawling through the parts of a ship nobody else wants to touch. Dreeth Coram could bench press a ground car, and it hadn't mattered at all in the end, against a targeting computer 3 light minutes away. What mattered was a man who knew exactly which wire was blue, and exactly what would happen if it touched the housing frame at the wrong moment, and who'd bothered to learn that 4 years before anyone needed him to. Cole thought about that a lot in the months afterward, whenever the champion title started to feel too heavy or too strange or too much like something that belonged to somebody else's life. He hadn't won by being strong. He hadn't even won, really, by being brave, not in the simple sense people meant when they used that word at the ceremony. He'd won by being exactly what he'd always been, a mechanic who paid attention, who fixed the thing in front of him whether or not anybody was watching, who understood a system well enough to know its weak point without needing to be told, and by refusing, at the one moment it counted most, to let that ordinary competence stay invisible. Dreeth Coram still asked him engineering questions on their morning walks through the promenade. Ilyara still found her way to the maintenance decks more often than protocol strictly required. Sarek still called him champion, with a straight face that Cole was fairly sure hid actual affection underneath the formality. And somewhere on a colony called Havorn, 900,000 people went about their ordinary lives, never knowing that a demoted maintenance tech with grease permanently under his fingernails had once spent 4 seconds of engineered sensor noise, buying their entire future back from a warship that never even got the chance to fire. Cole figured that was about right. Most of the important work in his experience happened exactly like that, quietly, underneath everything else, noticed by almost nobody until the one day it mattered enough for somebody to finally look. There was one more conversation worth telling, From a few weeks after the anniversary ceremony, Cole had spent half of hiding in a supply corridor with a plate of stolen appetizers. And it happened, fittingly enough, back at the same relay junction 4 decks below the promenade, where Cole had gone to run a routine diagnostic on the same housing that had saved a colony, because even miracle equipment needed its scheduled maintenance eventually. He found Dreeth already there, arms crossed, examining the jumper cable still coiled in its housing like it might reveal some secret if stared at long enough. I have told this story to visiting icers from 3 different houses, Dreeth said, without turning around. Every time someone asks the same question, and I have never had a satisfying answer, so I will ask you directly instead. Were you afraid, in the promenade before the first fall, truthfully? Cole leaned against the doorframe, favoring the shoulder that still clicked sometimes in cold weather. Yeah, he said, completely terrified. I've never lied about that part. And yet you did not hesitate before answering the challenge. I watched you. There was no pause. There wasn't time for a pause, Cole said. That's kind of the whole trick if there is one. You don't get brave by not being scared. You get brave by doing the thing anyway while you're still scared, because waiting for the fear to go away first just means somebody else pays the price for how long you took to decide. He shrugged, the good shoulder only. Also, for what it's worth, I've been fixing this ship's problems quietly for 4 years without anybody asking if I was scared to crawl into a reactor housing that might have had a leak in it. Turns out the scale of the problem doesn't actually change the job. You just do the next thing that's in front of you, and you keep doing it until it's done. Dreeth considered that for a long moment, the way he considered most things Cole told him, carefully, like a man cataloging something he intended to keep. I do not think my people have a word for that, he said finally. We have words for courage. We have words for strength. I do not think we have ever had a word for simply refusing to stop doing the next necessary thing regardless of how afraid the doing makes you. We don't really have a fancy word for it either, Cole said. Mostly we just call it Tuesday. If you liked watching a mechanic with a wrench and a plasma cutter outthink an entire warship, hit like and subscribe for more stories exactly like this one. And drop a comment telling me what you would have grabbed off your own belt if you were the one standing in that promenade. Share this with someone who still believes the biggest guy in the room always wins the fight, and I will see you in the next one.